Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to answer a question that you've asked me because, I did a little list, called Kapellmeister's Revenge, which I thought was so much fun to do, and so did you. It was a series of symphony cycles and orchestral work things by lesser-known conductors, and sometimes lesser-known conductors and lesser-known orchestras, which are every bit as good as the very best by the very best out there. And the purpose of this was to show that the fact that somebody has a big name or lots of promotion or a big career doesn't say anything about how much talent they have, or the chance that even if they may not be the biggest talent out there, that they have a spark of greatness, which may be revealed in a recording or two. That's always possible. And so, of course, some of you said, Dave, make it a series. You should do a series of individual works by people who are lesser known and all that. Well, I'm not going to do it. And this is why I'm not going to do it. I want you to just stay with me here because I think there's a logic here. First of all, 99.9% of the music that I talk about that's well known, that has great recordings by people who are not well known, I will discuss. I will discuss it in connection with reference recordings or the actual repertoire talk about those works. I mean, I've done almost 500 repertoire discussions of individual works where all of these people get mentioned. They will all be recognized. For the most part, and so it's redundant. That's really the bottom line. And the context is misleading. Why is it misleading? Because there is nothing that classical music people like more than, number one, hating on the major labels, the large, classical music military industrial complex, which deserves a lot of the hatred aimed at it in terms of its marketing and its priorities and the things that it allows us to buy and keep in print and all that stuff. But we have to always remember that the vast majority of the stuff that we're talking about was indeed recorded by that same vast military-industrial complex, which had the either foresight or stupidity, depending on how you look at it or when it happened, to make these recordings with people who were lesser known and therefore had less of an opportunity to be sold internationally. Although a lot of these recordings happened back in the day before there was a single international classical music conglomerate. In other words, the military-industrial complex was not a complex. It was really a series of local companies that swapped back and forth. And I was involved in that. I spent years going to classical music trade shows, watching, these labels make international distribution agreements and things like that. Whereas now, of course, with everything online and downloadable and whatnot, everything's available everywhere. And so that's no longer an issue. The internationalization has effectively happened. But one of the reasons we got so many of these local talents was because they were local. And they exist now, and we can listen to them, and I mention them whenever I can. So again, I don't think that we require a special dedicated series to this concept, number one. And number two, I do not want people to start hating on the labels, because for all that they may be stupid and abysmal and silly and clumsy and awkward and all of those things, they made the records. I mean, they did it. They did it, and you just as you shouldn't be prejudiced, in favor of people who are less, well-known, you also shouldn't be prejudiced against those who are well-known, who are successful. They're not all successful because they slept their way to the top, or they were screwing the right people, or they had wealthy backers, or somebody loved them for political reasons. I mean, no. A lot of these people are really, really gifted. And the other issue, the reason to do both, the reason to look at both the more popular and the less well-known, is because, as I've said and have a T-shirt that I say, talent isn't rare, intelligence is. There are tremendous numbers of enormously gifted musicians out there, and they're doing great work. And whether they have a big label or don't have a big label, it just makes no difference at all. They are wonderful, wonderful musicians. And greatness in classical music is not an unusual trait. I think it's important to understand that it exists outside of the the ghetto, the small group of vigorously promoted people. So there's lots of it outside, but it's within too. I mean, we have to strike a balance, and I think that's really an important factor to keep in mind. I don't want people to go away, to any listeners, any of you, to come away from this thinking that if it's on a major label or if it has an advertisement, it sucks, and and worse. And this is the final point that I really want to emphasize. There are schools of classical music listeners, cults, fan clubs, things of that sort, devoted to particular artists or devoted to particular works. I've talked about artist cults. Artist cults are easy to deal with because, they believe that everything the artist did is fabulous and everything else sucks and everyone else is evil and the enemy and whatnot. But work cults, that's a whole new thing. And we haven't really addressed, but it manifests itself in the wonderful world of classical music in the form of people feeling that the classical music military-industrial complex, there is some cabal, a conspiracy that's out there that is preventing them from finding the holy grail, the one perfect version, the ultimate greatness, the final transcendental, transmogrified, version of their most loved work. And those people are crazy. They're sick. It's nuts. It's not true, first of all. Conspiracy theories are not true, and nobody is trying to prevent anyone from hearing anything, consciously, number one. And number two, there is no such thing as a definitive performance of anything. The worst thing that can happen is that somebody gets so transfixed by a certain piece of music that they're either A, dissatisfied with everything, one way or another, or they believe that one thing is the ultimate everything and everything else is invalid, illegitimate, worthless, disgusting, icky poo, It's all so unhealthy. Why? Because it flies in the face of our major dictum, which is keep on listening, that this music is endlessly fascinating, that different versions are equally valid, that they offer multiple avenues to understanding the work and to having thrilling musical experiences, and the joy is in the discovery. It's in the journey, not the arrival, if you know what I mean. And so to do a, unknown artist super feature thing for performers, I think is redundant and just not helpful in terms of, potential listening habits. There is a whole playlist of great neglected composers and works. A big playlist, a huge playlist. I am totally behind that when it comes to music. I love discovering new pieces of music, and as often as not, they're going to be performed by lesser known artists, because if they were well known, one of the major guys would have gotten their talons onto them and recorded them accordingly. So there's tons and tons and tons of unusual music being played by fabulous artists who are not well known, and there's tons of standard repertoire played by fabulous artists who are not well known and by fabulous artists who are well known. The key is just to keep listening. It's not necessarily to categorize it all in that particular way. So I just want to say I am thrilled by the positive reception that video on Kapellmeister's Revenge got. I think the fact that it's going to be probably a one-off, or maybe one or two other things if I can think of something to do with it, I think that's a good thing, because there's value in scarcity. And I think also that the point is to make sure that we keep on listening and just judge everything fairly. Give everything its chance and not worry about whether somebody is famous or not famous, or well-known or not well-known, or promoted or not promoted. What matters is the sound of the performance and the interpretation. And that is the important thing which I want to emphasize. So thank you for the suggestions. Thank you for your enthusiasm. I'm explaining this because I don't want to disappoint you. I really don't. But I do have some fairly strong thoughts about how this thing ought to work, and I just wanted to share those with you. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you very much, and take care.